All right, it's 8:30, so let's get started. Thank you guys for being here. We're going to start with a short video that kind of recaps really well what's going on. Doesn't capture what happened last night, but provides a good idea of what's been happening for the past year.
It's at least the 7th attack on an Asian American in recent days across the city.
36-year-old Asian man, sources say, stabbed in the back in an unprovoked attack.
Another Asian-owned business in Fairfax County was targeted for crime.
It could have been my grandparents or my family member or anyone, you know, so that's why we have to step up our game and come together, join as one.
It almost seems like racism is kind of coming back for some reason.
Kung flu.
2 other victims in Oakland's Chinatown.
Now the attention is on us, but this is nothing new.
We demand justice.
America is a melting pot.
We shouldn't be hating on each other. We should love one another and love our neighbors, love our community.
All right, yeah, so I think that provides several examples of what's been happening, you know, the last couple of weeks and this past year. So I want to talk a little bit, share with everyone why we're doing this. Number one, this is a result of our survey. A couple of weeks ago, we did a survey and we realized to be more engaged, we need to be kind of be updated and be relevant. Number two, the Bible actually calls for this. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17 says, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. So God does place social justice in a high priority, and we as Christians should seek to fulfill that. Yeah, so I guess before we get started, let's start with the word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask that you be with us tonight as we discuss what's going on around the world, around our country, Lord, the hurt, the pain, the suffering, Lord. We ask that you give us wisdom and love on how to approach these issues, have compassion for each other, and love on one another. We ask that you bless this time. We pray these things in your holy name. Amen. Yes, so the point of us doing this is to provide a biblical and Christian approach to what's, on how to deal with what's going on right now. So there's, a lot of nonprofits that are focusing on this, but the point of us doing it is to do it from a Christian and biblical approach. All right. So I'm going to have so today we're lucky to have Nick, Barnabas, and Randy here with us to share their thoughts and perspectives on the assaults on Asian Americans. So I'm going to ask them to share a little bit about themselves. Please give us your name, age, occupation, and if you're serving in church, what you're doing there, if you attend a fellowship or a small group. All right, so we'll go with Nick first, and then Barnabas and Randy third.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Huang. I'm the online marketing manager at a consumer electronics company. I'm currently serving as a deacon for multimedia at EFCI.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barnabas. I'm a registered nurse. I've been attending EFCI for almost 4 years now. I'm not currently serving, but I'm a member of a small group there.
Hi everyone, my name is Randy. I'm in the Senior Learning and Development at Energy Resource Institute. Pretty much my job involves creating online digital training / learning resources.
Okay, and Randy, I guess which church are you attending and are you serving at any position?
Calvary Chapel, sorry.
Okay. I guess we'll jump into the questions. For people watching, there's going to be a 20-second delay between us here on Zoom and what you guys seeing on Facebook chat. I will be looking out for your comments. So if you do have questions and you want us, the panelists, to address, feel free to type it out. I'll see it, and I'll try to incorporate it in here. I do have a list of questions, so wherever it fits in best, I'll try to incorporate your questions as well. So the first question for everyone, I guess I'll start with, again, we'll just go in this order: Nick, Barnabas, and Randy. first question is, have you been victims of racism or have you experienced racism? And share your experience with us. Did you feel threatened or fearful? Yeah, so go ahead and we'll start with Nick.
Yeah, so actually, I've experienced a fair number of racism, right, when I was growing up, because I was actually originally born in Taiwan, and when I came to America, I had the accent. I didn't speak English, and often that fell victim, right, to racism. But actually, I want to share a more recent experience. It happened actually less than a month ago. It was on Valentine's Day. I took my wife to Laguna Beach, right? We wanted to do a picnic by the beach, outdoor, very safe, right? It's Orange County. Orange County, it's a controversial topic. But as I was there, we found a nice bench. We sat down, we were having lunch. And this gentleman came out of nowhere and started yelling at everyone saying, China took our jobs, right? Chinese this, Chinese that, to everyone. And then they started looking at me and then they walked closer. The guy sat down they sat down on the bench next to us and just kept talking about Chinese taking our jobs, taking our freedom, whatever that means. And then he walked away. So we thought that was done. And then after a few minutes, he actually came walking back, sat down and looked at me and then looked at my wife. And at that point, Whitney was about to kill someone. So I confronted him. I said, why are you saying these things? What's the basis that you're making these claims? Well, he just replied, I just want to get a reaction out of you. I just want to see what you would say. So at that point, I felt anger more than anything, because we have every right to be in this country, just like he did. And more importantly, as I look at the recent hate crimes against elderly Asian, I think about my parents. They're up in the Bay Area by themselves. And who's there to look after them, right? So I think as we think about the current situation, I think it's not only fear, but there's also anger on seeing how you can, what are the things that you can say and do to other people and minority groups.
In the same vein as Nick, I grew up in Malaysia, spent a little bit of time in Taiwan actually before moving here in first grade. So of course, language barrier was a huge issue for me, just my formative years of elementary school. I attended elementary school in Temple City, so I don't think racism was necessarily as prevalent because it was a mainly Asian American community. But as I got older, I realized that even among the Asian American community, there could be racism among different ethnic groups. But in terms of experiences, they have been more, offhanded comments like, oh, where are you from? Where are you really from? And, things like that. Oh, what does this mean in your language? With terrible accent or terrible enunciation, or people making fun of food that I would bring to school growing up, when my mom packed lunch. That smells terrible, which is funny because 10 years later, these are the same people that probably paying a leg and an arm for some fancy 1-star Michelin experience of that same ethnic food. So these are just some experiences that I've encountered over the past.
I will go to you, Randy.
Yeah, I definitely experienced a good amount of racism when I was growing up. I mean, I grew up in Taiwan. I was born in Taiwan. I came to the United States when I was a high school freshman. And I remember my English teacher in high school in Northern California. He made fun of my Chinese name, first and last name, and publicly in front of the whole class, just for a laugh. And it was in the 90s. I'm almost 40 now, by the way. It was in the 90s. And I was just like, what? I thought racism is wrong. I mean, I was like a new immigrant and I was very naive about American culture. And I thought racism ended with Dr. Martin Luther King. What a joke, right? And then professionally, I also experienced a good amount of racism. So for example, there's one company that I used to work for, and they have this, there was this old white American guy. He's like in his late 50s. He walks by my desk. It was like his first week on the job, by the way. He walks by my desk and he saw that I had a standing desk. And he said, what is this, some kind of Chinese thing or something? And I was just like, no, it's not. I said, this was a trend started by Alice, which is like a blonde white hippie lady in our office. I didn't say blonde white hippie lady. I said started by Alice. You know who Alice is. And I'm just following suit. I thought it was a good idea. And she's like, oh, okay. And I said, why do you assume automatically it's a Chinese thing? That's a little bit of a bigotry right there. And then he got super nervous, like that I'm calling him out on that. And I felt that from that experience, it really tells me that people who are very racist, sometimes they really just need to get called out. I mean, we need to start calling a duck and a chicken. You know, if it's racist, you call out, hey, you know, this is racist. This is racial bigotry. A lot of people, they think racism is involved like lynching someone or burning cross on the front lawn. Yeah, that's kind of like a very violent type of racism, but racial bigotry counts too. And like when you call that out, I think something in them is usually clicks, and they usually hold their horses for most people. So anyway, that's my experience so far.
Okay, thank you for sharing. All right, so Nick brought up a good point. I have experienced this myself. So I too have experienced been verbally accosted. Some people that I've seen on clips have been told that they should go back to their country. You don't belong here. Now, what does this mean? So how would you guys answer this? What does it mean to be American? And who gets to decide this, and how does it compare to other ethnic groups? I guess we'll start with Barnabas, we'll go Randy, and then Nick.
I think growing up, in Asia, my earliest experiences of like childhood shows typically show like, when I thought of American, I thought of, someone of Anglo-European, ethnicity. At that time, I also thought of like, African Americans or Blacks, but I don't think I would necessarily like associate it like Asian with being like an American until like I moved here, and that was the common like ground I found, as a first, second grader, was other people that looked like me, that shared similar cultures and similar backgrounds. And it was as I got older that I realized that being an Asian American in a way means that you're considered a perpetual foreigner. For those of us like in that 1.5, or like for me closer to that like 1.75, like my Chinese is, it's decent passing, but if I go back to Asia, they would consider me, it's like too American, it's like too like westernized. Oh, like my aunts and aunties, uncles would be like, oh, it's like the American boy coming back. Whereas like here in like the US, they would always second guess your cultural background, whether or not English is your first language, your country of origin. And that's kind of the tough road that we're stuck in, I feel, as those of like Asian heritage, is trying to find a place, trying to find an identity. Because honestly, like America's where I grew up. It is my home, and I want to feel like I belong.
I feel that as long as we're legally allowed to reside in the country, I mean, ideally, if you're a citizen, you pay your taxes. There's no shadow of a doubt. This is your country, just period. I mean, a lot of the taxes we submit for Social Security is being used to raise other people's children, pay for other people's retirements. Why is it that we don't belong in this country? It's legally we belong. This is our country, period. And people who are trying to redefine what constitutes as belonging in this country is based on a very evil ideology called white nationalism, which is neither biblical nor is it legal. So I think this question, it's by default, just, we belong in this country, just period.
Yeah, I think just adding on to that, right? I think anyone who has a legal right to be in the country, and in some way, shape, or form, you're contributing to the growth of the country, either financially through our taxes, or you're contributing to our community, you should be able to call this your home, because that's how you treat your home, right? You don't just sit here. You can legally be here and you do something for your home. I think this idea of not belonging or this idea of go back to your country, right? It's deeply rooted in a history of hate, right? If you look at the first immigration of Chinese back in 1850s, or even if you look at the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, right, you can see that there's already a lot of anti-sentiment because of fear that we're coming to take their jobs. But that's actually not the fact and not the reality, right? So a lot of these rhetorics that's used within politics actually just divides, right? Divides our identity of who Americans should be. And I think we, the people, should define what Americans should be and what America looks like. So I think that's why it's important that we have a voice, that we speak up.
Oh, very nice. And wow, spitting facts. Thank you. I guess an addendum to this, I don't know if we need to take up so I gave you guys each 2 minutes, but the full 2 minutes. But real quickly, how does it compare to maybe the bigotry that other ethnicities might face? So let's say Blacks, Latinos, and maybe Muslims. I guess we'll start with Randy, and then Nick, and then Barnabas. If you guys don't have any comments, you guys can also skip as well.
I'm sorry, do you mind skipping me for now? Because I didn't really quite comprehend the question, and I'll probably get some clues from other people's answers.
Okay, I can quickly, we'll come back to you, Randy, and I'll also reiterate the question. So how does the racism or the bigotry that we as like East Asians or Southeast Asians face compared to, Blacks, Latinos, or Muslims? Okay, I guess we'll start with Nick then.
I think in my opinion, discrimination and racism, it applies to different ethnic groups, right? We all experience it a little bit differently. We all have different historical background of how things arrive, right? So I don't really know how it compares because I'm not really in their shoes. I think the only thing I can say is that, I think America has no shortage of history, right? Of some of these things in both legal, in both our legislations or just the way that we are treating others. I think that's the only thing I can comment on it.
I think the way that like Blacks and Latinos experience hate and racism and discrimination is definitely, more so lately. Of course, we've seen like physical acts of violence against, our people group. But for like Blacks and Latinos, they weren't really ever considered white passing or have that access to like white privilege. That I feel like we as Asian Americans kind of fit into that category. And I guess a very explicit example is I've never had to fear for my life, like whenever I got like pulled over by police, so that would be an example.
Yeah, definitely different, but I felt the spirit is the same. It's you guys probably still recall the incident in 2017 when there's an Asian guy. He's supposed to be a pharmacist or doctor, and he got beaten up on United Express airline. Just because he was not compliant about some minor stuff. He got beaten up really bad. Like I think he lost his teeth or something. And it was significant outrage. And then that's also when people start smearing him, saying that, he's not exactly that good of a doctor anyway, and he likes to play poker. And people are just like, WTF, what's done to him was horrible. And now you're just kind of dragging him through the mud with these little anecdotal nonsense and try to distract the public from this incident. And so definitely there's racism against Asians. I don't think Asians really have it that much easier compared to the other shades of colors. However, because of the way Asian culture has been structured, deeply ingrained to just respect authority without question, it causes the Asians really just to comply with police 100% of the time, really. And it's very different. And there's also a lot of part of that culture was also Asians are extremely studious, like because of Confucianism and stuff like that, deeply ingrained in the culture itself, causes Asians to typically do a little bit better in schools, which causes a lot of the people who are inherently racist try to misquote that and saying that, oh, there's no racism in the United States, see how well Asians are doing. And Asians are super quiet, don't really protest about anything, and just kind of go along with the flow, which causes a lot of resentment in both, for example, in Blacks and Latinos. Really, like this is a real issue that has been existing for decades. And so we are just as racially oppressed as all the other races. except because of some circumstantial factors, it causes us to not die by the hands of police as often as certain races. That's all.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's actually a really good segue into my next question. But I did want to add a little bit, kind of be having majored in public administration, having to learn about the government and the history of government. Yeah, racism has evolved. Before there were a great number of Chinese immigrants, so I'll add my 2 cents. Eastern Europeans were discriminated against. Irish people were discriminated against. And yes, and like, but I think Barnabas touched on a good point. Like if you're white passing, eventually they got incorporated, and kind of that they also became kind of racist toward other minorities such as Blacks or Asians. But yeah, the history of racism continues to evolve. But yeah, very good segue, Randy, into our next segment, which is how do we get here? I guess what I want to ask is, are we complicit? Do we have a role in us arriving here? Have we been too quiet? Is our culture? Is it generational? Maybe is it like our church mentality where we think we need to be passive and always turn the other cheek? These are kind of the idea I'm going toward, and you guys can also respond to each other. I'll give you guys so you guys can take notes, and if you guys want to respond to each of the other panelists' points, feel free to do so as well. I also want to note, it's not victim blaming, but I think there's an element that we also need to be responsible for. Okay, then I guess we'll start with Barnabas this time first, and then Randy, and then Nick.
I think the Chinese word "guai" is like something that's so common. Like growing up, I'm sure we've heard it a lot of times. Like 听话, like listen, 乖, be obedient, be not necessarily subservient, but like listen to authority. And I think maybe because of the way I was raised up in a Chinese Christian community, where being obedient, listening to directions, not really second guessing things, does have a role in how I've approached these like issues in the past. Like when people have like made offhanded comments, I would just ignore it or just, leave the area. I would never really like instigate or like confront them, just because I felt like it wasn't necessarily my place to do so, and I didn't want to cause further trouble. And I think by extension, this has made us very easy victims, maybe because of the way that media has portrayed Asian Americans and also other people's interactions with us. And I'm sure COVID had a huge role to play also in this wider spread of Asian American attacks.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree that we definitely have a part by just trying so hard to be guai. And our culture is Asian culture. A lot of times, I'm not trying to say Chinese culture is literally all the Asian culture, but really most Asian culture are pretty similar in that sense. But Chinese culture has a saying called 至少门前雪，不要管别人瓦上霜. Basically, it says that everyone just worry about the snow that's right in front of your doorstep. Don't worry about the snow that's on someone else's rooftop. And basically, don't stick your nose in other people's business, even when they need your help. And I think a lot of that has been deeply ingrained, and that causes Asian Americans to not really do a lot to raise awareness about mistreatment or injustice. And as we know, bullies always seek out the easiest targets. We already see that because all those racist bullies, they have been targeting mostly old people and women. It's case in point. So because Asians traditionally has been viewed that way, it's very easy for people to just start targeting Asians. And it's true that we do have a little bit in causing this, what we have today.
Yeah, and I think speaking from maybe my upbringing and also maybe my influence, the influence of Chinese culture maybe in my life, right, to make that a little bit more personal, is that, when my family of four came to the United States, we didn't have a place to live, right? So the mentality is, heads down, survive, and don't cause any trouble, right? The most common thing we often hear, 你不要惹麻烦, right? 你就是低头工作，把事情做好，然后呢 good things will eventually happen, right? And a lot of times I think us in not speaking up, right, is at those moments is that we don't want to cause trouble for our family, right? I think also in certain areas we just don't want to get in trouble, right, for saying certain things. And I think that has also evolved over the years, right? As more of first generation, second generation have taken root here. I think that narrative has shifted a little bit, that we're embracing that, hey, this is our country. And you are seeing people speaking up even from different, you can see people speaking up in this generation, right? So I think that's something that's, really, really good to see. But I think it's definitely undeniable if you look at the media's portrayal or our representation in the news, right, of these hate crimes is not nearly in any proportion, right, to maybe crimes that happen to other hate groups. So for some, right, they don't even understand that this is a real issue that we're dealing with. So I think at the core of it, right, that has a component to play as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Nick touched on the there might be a generational difference in responses. I guess and media does have a role to play. I want you guys to maybe comment on, so I guess you already made comments on culture and some of you made it come on generation, but is there an element where the church kind of keeps pushing this passive agenda? Yeah, like agree, disagree, and I'd like to hear your comments on the role that church has to play. Let's start with Randy then, and then Nick, and then Barnabas.
Wow, yeah, and so because I'm going to be speaking on the church, so every Christian in this room, please feel free to correct me if you hear anything you disagree with, because I definitely am open to any of that correction, especially when it comes to the church and the Bible. But I feel that people very easily idolize their culture. Like, so you will see that, for example, for Black Americans, their church, a lot of the way they interpret certain passages, they will focus on the passages interpretations that suits their culture better, which is human nature. We all like things we're familiar with. There's nothing good or evil about that, just human nature. And so, for example, Black people, they like to look at the passages where it talks about victory, talks about freedom, talks about prosperity and things like that. And you see a lot of that, which is great. But then Chinese culture also have this heads down Confucianism kind of thing. And then we see the turn the other cheek. And we're like, oh, this reminds me a little bit of the traditional Chinese Confucianism I learned. That's familiar. Yeah, let's overplay this one. And I feel that culture causes us to often look at biblical passages with our own set of color lenses. And so not so much as the Chinese church is brainwashing people or misleading people, but because of human nature, we're just so prone to gravitate to what we're familiar with, and that kind of creep into the way we read the Bible. That's my personal take.
Yeah, I think, I've been fortunate enough to be maybe in a church, in a congregation that allows us to share our thoughts freely. And there's not really an agenda that's, imposed that we have to think this way or do that way, right? We're taught to go back to the word and figure out what the Bible teaches and how you should respond, right? So, but I have friends, right, in other churches, and I have heard other things. I think to Randy's point, he hit it, right on point, is that we almost have this tie-in, right? The most popular passage, I think, you would think about when you see social injustice from some Chinese churches is turn the other cheek, right? We're supposed to have forgiveness. Why don't you just forgive the people who hate you or the people who hurt you? And I think, as Christians, right, we're taught to search the truth, right? Search the Bible, right? Pray to God, right? Ask for directions. But we're also told to take action when we do see people getting hurt. So as a Christian, I will urge you, right? Don't, regardless of which church you go to, regardless what culture expectation has on you, right? It's on us to understand what does God's words actually say, and what do you do with those words. I think that's much more important than, oh, well, the church told me to do this or told me to believe that, right? I think, we're told to discern, right, and understand and apply.
Definitely agree with the points Nick and Randy both brought up. I think culturally, my experience growing up in the church would look different than somebody of a different culture or a different race. Even though we would both claim to be, believers and followers of Jesus, the cultural lens in which we view the Bible, in which we would interpret certain scriptures, definitely plays a role in our upbringing. And I think being part of that Asian culture, definitely keeping your head down, turning the other cheek, just and all those have come into play into, I think, creating just the current dynamic we have at the point we've come to currently. But, as I get older and as I grow more spiritually mature and actually, take the time to interpret and actually look at certain biblical passages, there is like call to action. I guess a very vivid example would just be like Esther. They finally found a decree for the Israelites, to protect themselves. And I think, it is definitely biblical. It's definitely the Christian thing to like forgive, to turn the other cheek. But I think we also have, there is also biblical, like, there's biblical evidence that we can stand up for ourselves, could be a voice for the oppressed, to be, a beacon of hope for those that need it.
Thank you, guys. So moving on to our next question, our next segment. What do you think are the leading factors? And I'll have you guys talk on the different factors that I've come up with. What is the role of politics in getting us here? So is there a political party that's kind of more responsible than the other? Does rhetoric matter? And what role, and so what can or should we do about it? So maybe what is the role of politics and politicians? Is there a political party that's maybe more guilty of inciting this than the other? So your thoughts on this? And we'll start with Nick and then Barnabas and Randy.
Yeah, I think the role of politics, right? I think especially as politicians and the representative of the people, right? The words you use have power, right? The words you choose to say has power, right? Because you have media coverage and you have people who has authority, but who may be misusing words or misusing phrases, right, to call certain things, right? So, for example, right, our previous leader of the country, right, used terms, right, that some might find racist, right, and might be hurtful to say, right, even though he feels like, hey, there's, we need to protect Asian people, but I still use very racist slurs and words to describe a scenario that's not necessarily true, right? So I think there's definitely a direct correlation, right, between what's been said and how it's being portrayed in media and how people receive it, right? Because the politicians and the words they use, right, people will receive that, right, and say, oh, well, if my president is saying it, why can't I say it, right? And I think part of that is also enablement, right? So not only are you getting coverage, you're enabling people to have these thoughts that might not be factual or correct or it's hurtful, right? And I think in terms of political parties, right, I think, we need to, the way I look at it, right, a person's character is a person's character, right? So we judge that person's character as a whole, right? But, I don't want to generalize and say certain parties have more to do with certain things, but, I would say, look at the things that's been said by the individuals, look at their actions, and decide for yourself.
Yeah, I would say politically, you could look at history and actually, at least the two major parties we have currently, both have faults, both have not been perfect towards Asian Americans. It was FDR, a Democrat at that time, that like signed the Japanese internment camp. You know, our previous president was Republican, so of course a lot of that rhetoric that's brought up readily resonates with that base, with that political party. But in terms of just like politics defining, I guess, the landscape, the rhetoric around how people view Asian Americans, I think more recently, as Asians have increased in population, you know, in terms of our advancements in society, I think, you know, we're kind of seen as like the pawns in like the political game. That's my own view, that like both parties want to get out votes. Both parties want to like reach out, like, oh, okay, you know, lower taxes. This is like the party that's more Christian, or this party reaches more to minorities. But I don't think either party is 100% perfect. And I think, kind of like what Nick was saying, the character of somebody is more important, in my opinion, than their political party. So I honestly don't really have a good answer as to, you know, which party is more to be at fault for, you know, whatever's happening. But I do think that we do need to be more engaged in politics. We need to vote for politicians that, you know, do have our interests, our best interests at hand.
Yeah, this is such a great question, to be honest. I feel that in 2020, it's very interesting. I don't know if I can call it prophetic, but it's very interesting that in 2020, so many things has happened that really allow things to come to clarity. It's like hindsight 2020. You know, first of all, we saw a fantastic candidate whom I would not have voted for, but I really like him. It's Andrew Yang. He's extremely intelligent. He's probably one of the best, if not the best, Democratic candidate. Though I won't vote for him, but I will admit he's great. And then they remove him from News Report. We all know that. Everyone is saying that mainstream media, we're not just talking about Fox, we're talking about CNN and all these other liberal media as well. They've all been removing his face. And that's already telling us that those who claim to not be racist, they are racist. It is the only Asian candidate, and that's how he was treated. And on that note, I felt that it's very dangerous to attribute racism to any kind of political figures or parties, in my opinion, because I feel that it's a cop-out. You know, we are racist. Yes, Donald Trump, I'm just gonna call him by his name because we all know he was talked about here. Yes, Donald Trump is very mean. And yes, he uses things that are basically racial slurs, like saying China virus or Kung flu or something like that. And that is totally wrong, absolutely wrong. And I'm positive God is very displeased with those things out of his mouth. But to say he is the cause for all this, no, because a lot of these heinous crimes are committed by liberals and Black Americans who hated Trump. If they claim to hate him so much and stand for everything stand against everything Trump stands for, why are they racist then toward the Asians? Why are they attacking these old, elderly Asian men and Asian women? No, this is a cop-out. I felt that for us to really confront this problem is for us to have this dedication to face the inconvenient truth. Yes, American is racist. And yes, we have a problem. We got to fix it. We cannot just say, oh, it's all because of the big orange man. Oh, or all because of the Black Lives Matter, they're jerks. No, it's not. It's beyond that. You know, we have an entire country. We need Asians to rise up, to be more willing to be honestly confront these issues, to get more involved with politics, like many of you have been saying here, to honestly call things like it is without lying to ourselves or others, and not cop out to someone else, to blame someone else for it.
Thank you. And again, great segue into my next question. Yeah, Andrew Yang's coverage was severely muted by mainstream media. And this is the next question. So what role did media have to play in us getting here today? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Again, was our coverage suppressed? Does media use language that hurts us or incites violence against us? And again, what can or should we do about it? And let's start with Randy this time, and then Nick, and then Barnabas.
Definitely be more vocal as Asians not on the not so mainstream media such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, any other venues, to be more vocal, and also be more vocal in real life as well. And just let people know that, hey, we're willing to be very honestly have an open conversation about these topics. I feel that's probably the best first step, but I don't know what additional steps we can take.
I just want to say for the record, if Andrew Yang did make it, I would vote for him. He's a really good guy, very smart, very intelligent. Shout out. I think one of the things that we think about media and also media coverage, right? We have to understand that no media company is unbiased, right? I think that's a fact. And, and I think if we think about the way we curate our news, right? The way we get our social media feeds, a lot of times we're just creating our own echo chamber, right? You subscribe to what you would like to hear, you subscribe to things you agree with, and all of a sudden, everything you see are people saying things that you agree with, right? So I think in the same lens, sometimes we need to get out of our own echo chamber, our own bubble, to look at things and evaluate the facts, right? Because I think it's too easy to fall into this mentality of like, oh, well, I read it here and this person also said it, so it must be true, right? So one thing is, I think we have to, especially now, be educated and think from both sides and examine the facts for ourselves. I think what we can do, right, as Asian Americans is to think about, okay, to Randy's point, are there alternative media that we can voice some of these things, and are we proactively engaging our communities to create those opportunities as well, right? I think you kind of need to do both, right? You need to be out there. You also need to speak.
Yeah, I think media is definitely biased on both sides. There's no perfect, absolutely net neutral media company that won't push its own agenda. I think even though they try to portray news, as unbiased, that's like the hope. But, Fox News would portray media geared towards their viewers, and then CNN will portray media geared towards their viewers. So I think in terms of maybe Western media versus Eastern media, there's also differences there too. I think a lot of the rhetoric around these recent attacks, I think one thing I do take fault and I do wish the media talks about more is attributing more of these as actual hate crimes. I think when we see attacks against other minorities such as Blacks and Latinos, it's very common to see it's racially motivated, or there's a hate behind it. Whereas, an example would be the recent Atlanta shooting. They just said 8 dead by an attacker. When in honesty, you just look at the racial makeup of the majority of the victims and they were all Asian. And that's something that the media is not really willing to talk about. And I do take a lot of fault with that.
Okay, thank you. So now we have a viewer question. This one comes from Vincent. It's about the model minority myth. How does this impact us? So there's a surprise question for you guys. I'll give you guys some time to think about it. I will discuss where the model minority myth actually originated from. And I'll start with Nick, Barnabas, and then Randy. But for you guys watching, the model minority myth actually came about later on. So Chinese people and East Asians, when they first entered the country, they were just seen as hard laborers. We weren't seen as particularly successful, and they even excluded us. Eventually, when they did lift the Chinese Exclusion Act, they only allowed rich upper class people into the country. And this is where this is the beginning of that model minority myth. Of course, rich people, they're going to be educated, they're going to be successful. And if you just keep letting rich and educated, successful people in, wealth builds more wealth, and they're going to be successful, and then successful people don't commit crime. And this is so this has been used like against other minorities. But it's not because like our culture or we're more like inherently harder working or whatever. It's just they like American laws only let in like rich, wealthy, successful people, and that cultivates more success. And it's been used and weaponized to hurt other minorities. So yeah, so I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on it. Like, how does it impact us? Does it impact us? How does it impact you? Yeah, and we'll start with Nick.
I probably need a little bit more time to think through, so I don't know if Barnabas, if you don't mind going first.
I mean, I think model minority, it's a cop-out. It honestly is. Growing up, I bought into it. It's like, oh, I'm Asian American. I'm like, I have good opportunities, good educational, social economic opportunities. So as a result, I would look down on, some of my classmates in high school of like other ethnicities that probably would not go to college right after graduation, that would maybe go to like the military instead or like work for a couple of years. But, as I get older, like I realize that, not everybody's afforded those same opportunities. Wealth creates wealth in the same way that like opportunities create opportunities. If your parents, are college educated, if they've have a nice, middle class income, you're more than likely going to continue staying in that bracket, in that like bubble. Whereas if your parents have to work multiple jobs, you have to babysit multiple brothers and sisters, you're less likely to be able to find time to, even if those opportunities are present, your culture, your environment definitely affects how much, I guess, how active you are in pursuing those opportunities. So I think definitely the model minority myth has like hurted more than helped.
Yeah, I really dislike that. And it's not a matter of, I don't like compliments or anything like that, but I actually think it's very harmful. I feel that that belief is very harmful to the society as a whole, because that belief is essentially saying you can attribute a certain quality to an entire demographic of people, which is in itself very racist, even though it's a compliment, allegedly a compliment. Because if you can say something good about an entire race, then by that logic, you can say something bad about another entire race. And that's a very dangerous pattern for society to follow. Not only that, it's also bad for interracial relations because like many of you have described, this has been weaponized against certain skin colors. They've been weaponized against, for example, a Black American, saying that if Asians are rich and they're people of color, then why are you guys not that rich yet? Like things like that, which causes further resentment. Maybe that's why there's so many Black Americans attacking Asians in the recent hate crimes. And generally, that's just not healthy to have that kind of usage. And last but not least, it's also unhealthy for the Asian community as well, because everyone is unique. What if we have kids who want to grow up to be activists, but they've been taught you're supposed to be a model minority? Like hypnotism, you're supposed to grow up just say yes and nod your head, be a yes man, say yes boss to everything that whoever the government says or the policy says, and you're just not supposed to protest because you're the model minority. And that's very bad. And I've seen that played out firsthand in K-12 when I was teaching. A lot of times the Asian students, the Asian students with good grades, they were on purpose paired up with like the worst kid in class who are extremely distracting. And nobody wants to sit next to them. If you put a white kid next to them, his or her parents is going to come to school to protest about it. But no, they put an Asian kid right next to them. And Asian kids complain to the schools all the time, but a lot of time their protesters is ignored, and their parents don't advocate for them because they're model minorities. So their kids are being exploited as a resource that are not properly served as a result. Generally speaking, I feel that belief is very unhealthy.
And I think just to add on, right, for a lot of people, right, perception becomes reality, right? And when you have all these, when you have this model minority myth, right, that's also expectation that's placed on an entire generation of people as well, right? So you almost have this reinforcement of, oh, you're supposed to be good. You're supposed to get good grades. You're supposed to be you're supposed to have a good job, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a whoever, right? And at that point, if you actually take the veil off and say, okay, well, are you actually, because everything's in reality, everything's in relativity, right? So if you really do compare at the top of the best of Asians, right? We also know that there's systemic issues that also exhibits, right? It's like, you're good enough to be up here, but you're not good enough to be up here, right? If you look at the study on bamboo ceiling, for example, right? Even with same qualifications, statistically, we just don't compare, right, to some of the other counterparts. So I think it's actually two parts that's fairly harmful, right? One is we take this perception into reality. Sometimes we even think we're expected to be something, but in reality, when you actually do compare to others, you're actually not up there at all, right? So you kind of have this paradox of thoughts. It's like you're just kind of in the middle, not up nor down, but people on the bottom don't accept you. People on the top don't welcome you, right? So I think that's actually very harmful, right? And in the way that, in our psyche, or in the way that we have to teach our children, right? That, hey, this world actually have expectations for you in these ways, and sorry, you can't change it, right? That's kind of the reality of it. Just a disclaimer, I don't have kids yet, but I'm just saying hypothetically.
Very excellent point, and reminds me of like a statistic I just read regarding kind of unemployed Asians. I think unemployed Asians like are faring the worst through COVID, like more so than Blacks or Latinos. It's taken them far longer, like I think I read somewhere 3 times as long to get back into the workforce. So there's definitely a point to be made there. All right, so we're going to move on to the next block, what I call the solutions block. And this is a user comment as well. How would you, I guess personally, and what is like a Christian way to respond to racist comments? I guess we'll start with Randy, and then Nick, and then Barnabas.
My response is quite simple. I usually just very calmly and very, very simply and directly just define it for what it is. It's racist. Sometimes I can get a little bit specific. I can say, this is racial bigotry, because I don't want people to, because there's some people who actually have a very narrow definition of racism. They feel that as long as they're not lynching me, they're not racist. And, but there is bigotry, that counts. And I can tell them this is racial bigotry. I don't appreciate it. And call it out. Usually it's good enough. If I happen to have any scripture to back it up, if I can quote scripture, that'll be even more powerful. That's it.
Yeah, my comment to that is I think you need to, right, speak up for yourself. I think second thing is if the verbal abuse is to a certain level that you don't feel comfortable, maybe you should report it, right? There's many organizations. You can go to stopaapi.org, right? They actually have a report that says 68.1% of discrimination is verbal, right? So verbal is a large part of the discrimination. So you should either report it, right? If the number is so big that they can't ignore it, then they can't ignore it, right? So I think not doing anything is not the right thing to do, especially if you know it's flat out wrong, right? And to Randy's point, right, if it's specific that you can reference the scripture, or if it's if it's something that you have conviction for, that you need to speak up and stand up for yourself, then I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah, I think along the same block of what was previously stated, I do think calling them out on it is definitely something that I personally have to be more proactive on. Even in like work environment, there's always like casual, racist jokes thrown around. And I think for too long, maybe many of us have been complicit in that and just turning a blind ear to it. But I think if we call them out more and if we actually stand up for ourselves, this would be a less commonplace thing, and we would see a change. As for like scripture, if that's something that you could bring to the table, and if they would hear it out on, then that would definitely help. But if they're not Christian, bringing scripture is not going to do much for your cause. So yeah.
Sorry, may I add one more thing, if that's cool? I think Barnabas actually brought up a good point, right? Because as the way we've interacted with friends, also coworkers, sometimes they jokingly say things and they don't realize that those things are actually maybe not appropriate to say, right? So I think sometimes it's not that they have 100% ill will, they want to attack you. But I think you have to draw the line in the sand somewhere and set boundaries as to what you accept and what you don't accept, right? And I think as an Asian American, right, I think we have to be clear, because we also don't want to be an enabler, right? You don't want someone to say, oh, well, I joke with this friend all the time and he's cool with it, why you're not cool with it, right? I think as a people, if we can confront these things, I do believe that we can make a change.
Oh, all excellent points. Yeah, silence is violent. I just saw that in South Park. No, but I actually, I think it's a good opportunity to recap what all of you guys said. Yeah, I think both Randy and Barnabas touched on kind of similar, on the same point, where some people might play it off as racist, and they're gonna, or they might play it off as like just a joke, and you're being too sensitive, and then they're think, I'm not a racist. I'm just being playful. I'm just joking, and like I don't lynch people. I don't hunt people down. I don't have a white hood on. I'm not a racist, and that's from John Oliver. I just saw that too. That's a good piece. Tucker Carlson's tactic. And yeah, and to Nick's point, to reiterate, we got to report it. We got to set boundaries for ourselves. And a lot of this, yeah, it's not a hate crime, but these are still hate incidents, and they can be tracked. And hopefully, yes, if we are visible enough, it can't be ignored. So all excellent points. So moving on. So let's just be honest here. A lot of hate crimes, and hate incidents perpetrated against Asians have come from Black minorities, Latino, and Black and Latino. Yes, the latest crime was perpetrated in Atlanta by a white guy, but per population, like the crime rates against Asians by population, Blacks have been probably committing the most. And if people are curious about the statistics, I can share it, or you guys can look for it online. So I mean, it is an uncomfortable question, but I don't think that means we should like bury our head in the sand and ignore it. So, but let's address it head on. What can we what's a biblical way to approach this? What's the Christian way to approach this? What can we do about it? Yes, okay. And let's start with Barnabas, and we'll go to Randy and then Nick.
Okay, actually take some time to formulate my thoughts.
Sure. Then Randy, are you ready?
Yeah. This problem is not caused by a single factor. This is like a very large, multiple facets of contributing factors that's causing this. I remember when I was teaching in my early years of teaching, I think it was my second year. Yeah, I think it was my second year teaching, that I had a Black American student in my class, and I was asking him to perform certain tasks. And I gave him a very simple direction. It was a very calmly given direction, very trivial encounter. And he just refused me. And then he said, "You're just an Asian." That's what he said to me, literally, as a teacher. "You're just an Asian, man." And so that was when it kind of hit me that I think it was my initiation to a Black Americans antagonism, not all of them, obviously, but a very large percentage of Black American antagonism towards Asian Americans. And it really causes me to look into these issues. I don't really harbor hatred for that student or anyone who feels that way about Asians, but I felt this is an issue worth looking into. And because there's so many factors at play here, that I felt the fastest way to solve this is for Asian churches and Black churches to start banding together in collaboration. That's probably the fastest shortcut to address this issue.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for one thing, right, hate cannot drive out hate. And I think if we place the focus on certain ethnic groups, instead of focusing on what the problem actually is, right? A lot of times we know hate stems from uncertainty, right? It comes from things of unknown, right? Sometimes it comes from misinformation. So, and I think oftentimes it comes from just pure ignorance, right? So I think a couple of things we can do, right, to Randy's point, is that, look, maybe a lot of times, right, we have to be honest with ourselves, right? How oftentimes have we had opportunities, right, to collaborate or make friends or build relationships with different ethnic groups, right? Because I think really, if we think that there's healing that needs to happen, right? Let's say if there is ill intentions, well, let's take the step, right? Let's figure out how we can work these things out, and let's get to know one another, take away that uncertainty, right? That's the only way we can build our community, is to be to really treat it like it is, right? We see people as people, right? And I think any injustice against any people group is injustice against every people group, right? I think we have to approach it from that mentality.
There was a recent IG video I saw of, mixed interracial Black and Asian, couples, and they've all, it was actually really thought-provoking. It was like, just there were like signs that were like saying, we're in this together, we are all in support of like no racism regardless of your racial background. And I think that's maybe something that, in the same veins as Randy saying, Black and Asian churches, banding together. Definitely, I think that's something that should be more publicized rather than like these, I know they're not isolated incidents. There is definitely a statistical reasoning behind this. I think a lot of it has to do with like, wealth disparity, just income differences, the targets, they're easy, but I think if we do just focus specifically on the color or ethnic background of the perpetrators, in a sense, I think it also like stoops us to that level. Growing up Asian, there's a lot of like praising of, Bailan Wenhua versus, let's say, like Heiren Wenhua. And, some of that is also deeply ingrained in how I perceive race relations to this day. And, I definitely do think that there should be like solutions. I think maybe the best way to do it is for people of that same like racial background or cultural background to call out, their own people on it, in the same way that like we as Asians could like, hold each other accountable. I think it's also up to like Blacks and Hispanics to hold their people accountable for these, injustices.
Okay, I think we're running a little late on time, so let's try to move things a little bit quicker. Maybe try to answer things in a minute or so, maybe a minute 30 instead of 2 minutes. And Katie, if you could maybe keep track of time that way. I do want you guys to address really quickly, how would you answer those who would say you're taking away from the Black Lives Movement by emphasizing, Asian lives right now? I've heard that. I've seen that. So real quickly, if you guys could address that. I guess we'll start with Randy, Nick, and then Barnabas.
Oh, it doesn't. Asian lives matter too. All lives matter too. Dr. Martin Luther King, whom I would say every Black person will honor, I would imagine. I personally honor him as a personal hero. He says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That settles it, just period.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it doesn't take away from it. If anything, it's a sign of maybe solidarity. If what they stand for, they believe in, I think they also have an active reasoning more so to like stand up for Asian lives too.
Okay, yeah, I really like Randy's response in that quote. Actually, I think we're doing good, so you guys can maybe take your time answering. I think we'll try to end by 10 o'clock. Okay. So, how do you, I guess, okay, there's no good segue into this, but how do you feel about self-defense? And should we arm ourselves? Should we form a militia to come to each other's aid? I guess we'll start with Nick, and then Barnabas, and then Randy.
Yeah, I think, I think especially now I have a family, right? I will defend them no matter what, right? No matter what type of threat, no matter what kind of harm, right? I will protect the ones I love, right? That's what we need to do. And I think in terms of arming ourselves, I can still recall back, I think it was maybe around when Black Lives Matter started to happen, right? And there was a lot of riots. I live in Costa Mesa, which is really close to Huntington Beach, and then we were able to see maybe 2 blocks from my house, right? The Target was being looted, and people were going in and out. I remember that night locking every single window in my house, and finding, I was trying to look for my house for like a baseball bat. I couldn't find one, so the closest thing I found was a hammer. So I thought it was Thor or something like that. So so I definitely think, if you do sense that there's danger, right? If you do think that there's harm that's going to be happen, okay, then do something and protect yourself. Make yourself in the safest environment possible, right? And I think in terms of the idea of forming a militia, although I might not agree with the term, I have seen this news down in Orange County where a band of neighbors, because one of the household was an Asian household, and they saw his house being they were being targeted. People were like graffiti on their house. They formed a neighborhood watch that would go around his house, right, throughout the day, just to make sure that he's protected, right? So I think, and he and his family is protected. So I think from that perspective, yes, right, if there's a need, I'm willing to, take stand, make neighborhood watches, and making sure that, I keep my family safe. I also, if I do know that someone might be at harm, I will step up.
I think violence begets violence. I'm not suggesting to be like instigator and just like rash out in like vengeance or justice, but if there is like an active threat to like me and my loved ones, I am within my legal rights to have self-defense. And I have considered exercising my Second Amendment. And at this time I don't see a need to, but should the need arise, you do have a right to protect yourself. You do have a right to care for your own individual safety, your individual liberty. And a militia, that's also a very strong term, but I do think that proactive stuff we could take in the Asian community is just, watch out for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a huge question. I personally look at both Luke 22, chapter 22, section 36 to 38. But now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And Jesus encouraged his disciples to have a sword. But interesting thing is, when Peter was very eager to use it, he couldn't even wait. Like this moment, as soon as somebody tries to grab Jesus, he's like, "Oh right, it's my sword time." He just chop off someone's ear right away. He's good too. And knowing his personality, he's obviously a very bold person. He's very brave in the flesh, and that's right up his alley. And you could tell he has absolutely no hesitation or fear or anything about using it. But I felt it's totally biblical to have some sort of protection, whether it's firearm or sword, or it depends on, some people, they do bow and arrows, and whatever it is, with the sole purpose of using it to avoid conflict, instead of, I really just want to see blood. Like, man, I have all these bullets, I would love to shoot somebody. Like, that mentality is sick, and that's wrong. But to have it to avoid conflict, I feel it's very healthy and it's very biblical.
All right, thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, it's a big topic, and hopefully we'll have more options to address that in the future. So we're gonna get to the final parts, which is like still part of the solutions block, but what can we do as a community, as church, and as individuals? So let's tackle one at a time first. We'll start with, how can we help as a community? Start with Barnabas, and then Randy, and then Nick.
I think we touched on a lot of these, or we touched on this question a lot through our conversation tonight. First step is being proactive to stand up for ourselves, because as the past couple of months and incidents shown, it seems like everybody's against us unless we bring awareness to it. So we within the Asian community do need to stand up for ourselves, to voice out our concerns, to bring awareness to these hate crimes and these like anti-Asian sentiments. And then another active step I feel like we could do is like reach out to Asian American politicians or those that are willing to hear us out. You know, if we have more legislature or more awareness of this on like a geopolitical level, I think that's like a very proactive step in addressing some of these solutions. And then lastly, just like on an individual level, yeah, I think the time's long gone to like turn the other cheek or ignore these issues. I do believe we need to call them out as we see them.
Okay, yeah, I'll give everyone an opportunity, but this question right now is on the community level. So what can we do on the community level? And then, yeah, so the next question will be church, and then the following will be on individuals. All right, going to Randy.
On a community level, I feel that education is probably the fastest way to move forward, assuming we're leaving church out of the picture for now, you know, including even the atheists and everyone else. Education is the fastest way to raise educational awareness. So for example, you know, if anyone here in this chat room or anyone who's watching this, you want to start a LinkedIn entity that's like a purely volunteer entity that educate the public, raise awareness on Asian stuff, and to kind of produce these kind of content that's viral education, that's supposed to go viral but contains educational messages to really help people get educated on this. You know, I'm happy to discuss any kind of possibility to collaborate to make that happen. It's obviously not going to make a single penny, but it's good for the Asian community. I feel education, especially viral education, is a very good way to start.
Yeah, I think at the high level, right, raising awareness, making sure that there's enough people who knows what's going on, and I think being able to educate, right, being able to share what we know, and also to learn, right, from other communities on what type of things that they're experiencing. And I think thirdly, right, from a community level, there are good programs out there today, right? Like I've seen examples of, you know, people forming their own group, right, to volunteer, to help the elderly, to make sure that when they go get their groceries, they don't have to look across their shoulder, right? I think spreading out that there's also programs that exist that people can participate, because I think when we, you know, the last thing we want is inaction, right? We hear, we see, and we just say, oh well, right? I think what we need to do is actually say, no, it's a real issue, making sure that people know that it's a real issue. We educate them on what the issue actually is, and then provide them on the actions that they can take and say, hey, maybe I can join this group, or maybe I can read up on more of these programs, and maybe I can form my own program. If I see one that there's a need in Irvine, for example, then let's do that, right? But I think we have to think, as a community, and also, you know, just as an ethnic group, right? To think about, you know, what are some of the things that exist, right? Some things that maybe we have an opportunity to make an impact.
All very good ideas, and I would like to add something in there. What I heard on the news today, you know, regarding the shooting that happened in Atlanta. So what are the, you know, some community action items we could take? One is to call your legislator, your local representatives, your city council members to change education. So Randy's right on point, education. But it might be too late for this generation, but we can always start with the next generation, and, you know, now is the best time. But what do we mean by education? You want to inform kids or students that we are part of the community. We contribute to the community. We have inventions, and we benefit society. These are the types of things that we should be educating people on. So I thought that was a great solution. All right, so next question, we'll start with Randy and then Nick and Barnabas, is what can we do at the church level?
I feel that church for decades have had a missed opportunity. We see the church for the longest time have been segregated by race, self-segregated by race. The Bible never told church to do that, but because of humans' narrow-mindedness, we segregate ourselves by race. We have Asian churches, have Black churches. I mean, I know there's some multicultural churches, but even those multicultural churches, most of them, are not an accurate depiction of the community's demographic. there's still a lot of segregation in the community, in the city. So if that didn't happen to the church, if the church was able to be like the early church as God intended, how could our Black and Latino brothers and sisters stay silent when Asians are being pummeled? That's just impossible. You know, when we're in the Bible study, people will be talking about and praying over it. People are going to be volunteering to educate their relatives, their friends and neighbors. So it's because we have these missed opportunities. And as churches, if we could, I'm not saying we're to merge right now, obviously, that's not possible logistically, but to really just form partnerships with the various churches, the various groups, it's going to be a very good start.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think, one of the things that we need to do is to get out of our own comfort zones, right? We enjoy our church family because hey, there's people who shares my cultural background, share my own thoughts, right? I think at some point we need to tear down the walls, right? Because, I think in order to have true unity, right, and in order to really be one body under Christ, you can't have separations, right? You have to take action, right? And then you have to get yourselves outside of your own bubble, right? And truly see the community as it is. And to Randy's point, that might be, hey, let's volunteer together, right? And then also use your power, right? Let's say you have a small group, let's say you have a fellowship. Hey, why not band those people together and say, look, there is an opportunity to serve these other communities. Let's do that. Because I'm sure, right, when you're putting yourself out there and you're making an effort to heal, to build, right, and then to form a relationship with other ethnic groups, and you're showing goodwill, they're not going to just walk away, right? And I think through doing all these things of kindness, and all these things where you're extending, right, your helping hand, people are going to understand your goodwill, and at least we can start somewhere, right? I think probably the most important thing is we need to get out of our own bubble and our own mindset, right? To really think about what does the body of Christ actually look like outside of just the realm of my church, right? Or for some people, just the realm of my congregation.
I think both Nick and Brandy talked a little bit about this, but not necessarily merging, but just maybe joint opportunities to have churches of different cultural and racial backgrounds to maybe have some sort of joint volunteering, joint service. Because the Martin Luther said the most segregated hour is Sunday morning, and it's very true. Even though we as Christians, we're called to embody the body of Christ and to preach to all nations, it's very easy to fall into our bubble, to fall into old habits, to fall into the same environment we grew up in, and it definitely is a very bold and hard step to reach out to other people that do not look like us or don't share the same cultural background as we do. But I think that's a good start for us in the church to reach across to other people.
Okay, thank you. And second to last question. And we've already talked a lot about some of the things we can do as individuals, but I would like to maybe for you guys to, if there's something new, let's go for it. Otherwise, recap what you think are the most maybe important things that we could be doing right now as individuals. And start with Nick and then Barnabas and Randy.
I think I have to thank Winston for inviting me on this opportunity, right? Because it gave me a chance, right, to learn even deeper, right? To learn even deeper about the root of the issue, to understand what's going on, and really keep my eyes open to see what things are happening, right? I maybe have watched, countless hours of videos about the history of Asian American hate, right? The current things that's going on, right? What are things being reported, and then looking into reports. I think the number one thing you can do right now is to educate yourself, right? Understand what's happening, and really see what's going on. And within those moments, right, think about what God is speaking to you as you're learning these things. And what God speaks to you to take action, you take action, right? So if, let's say, you come across an organization that's doing awesome things, right, to to help out the cause. And maybe you can financially support them if you can't physically be there, right? If God spoke to you that when you see these elderly on the street that's getting harmed, maybe join one of those groups. Or if you know elderly within your family or community, offer them and say, look, I'll walk with you, right, to the grocery store, right? I'll go with you to get those things done. And if it compels you to and within your ability to say, okay, I'm seeing a lot of people who may have lost their job and or their business is about to close down. Okay, maybe I'll support their business, right, by going to their business to make sure that they can stay afloat, right? I think knowledge should, if you equip yourself with knowledge and then you have the convictions, you will know what actions to take.
Individually, I've been just following up on social media groups, Asian American activist groups. I think individually, if the opportunity presents itself, I definitely would like to, attend one of their rallies or to donate to these causes, and also to help support Asian American businesses. I think there was such a huge push to support Black businesses, and I personally also went to some Black businesses during that time. But I think in that same vein, we could also push for just more awareness of Asian American businesses, small mom and pop shops, especially because those have been the ones that have been hit the most during this time. And yeah, just individually tell my friends about this issue, even if it does feel like I'm speaking to the choir. But for those of my friend groups that aren't Asian, it definitely, this is also affecting, you personally, you're my friend and you're Asian. And as a result, those that aren't aware of it, if we could individually share these incidents, share our own feelings and thoughts about this with them, it could be a ripple effect.
Winston, just to be sure, because I think a part of what you said got cut out audio. I kind of missed it, I think. Was it regarding personal action items? Is that what this question is about?
Yes, personal action items. If you have anything you haven't shared yet, you would like to share, now's the time. Otherwise, you could recap what you think are the most important things we talked about. We can do as individuals.
Okay. Probably for me, the biggest takeaway, action item, is to use the link that Winston you're referring to about writing a letter to the government, petition and stuff like that. I'll probably follow up on that. If you happen to have a link, I would love to have it later to make that petition. I think that's something that I could personally do. I want to do after this. As for me, a general way I see this is, I always feel that the Bible says not to lie and be truthful, but I feel that sometimes we forget lying to ourselves also counts as lying. If something is racist and we try to pretend it's not, whether it's racist toward Asians or racist toward Blacks or Latinos or anyone else, it's lying. I think really just to stand on the truth, to know what is true and what is not, and to stand for it, and to have a voice. And if we can find like-minded individuals to form a coalition to produce public education to help raise awareness and to educate a lot of people, especially in a virality kind of way, I feel that would be a very nice next step to achieve for me personally. That's about it.
Okay, yeah, I'll look for it. I just heard it on the radio, so I actually don't have a link. But yeah, I'll look for it and we'll send it to everyone. Final question: Is there a degree that we should be approaching this? Is there an appropriate level of response? Can people be either too apathetic or actually too overzealous? And then how can we rally others? And this will be our final question. Let's start with Barnabas, Randy, and then Nick.
Could you repeat that again, the question?
Oh yeah, is there an appropriate level of response? So I guess the fear kind of is, can you be overzealous? At least in the BLM movement, I've seen people receive death threats from someone who might write All Lives Matter, maybe didn't mean it that way, maybe truly does believe in All Lives Matter, but they end up receiving a lot of death threats and hate mail that actually end up pushing them like super far extreme the other direction. So I guess the question is there an appropriate level of kind of response to this where we're not being overzealous, but we're also not being apathetic?
I think everybody's called to respond to this issue in their own way. So what would be, I guess, a degree of overzealousness for somebody might be the norm for somebody else. So to be honest, I don't think there is necessarily like a right level of response, but I think just any form of response is a good start. Even if it's just like signing the petition or donating, you don't necessarily have to be out there writing a long IG post or attending a rally or protest or, marching or doing a neighborhood watch. Just little actions make a big difference.
It's a hard question to answer, but personally, I set a pretty low bar for what's overzealous. I personally feel that as long as people are not just operating in anger and really want to hurt someone else, just to satisfy that bloodlust, as long as it doesn't get there, it reminds me of James 1:20, for men's anger does not bring about the righteousness of God. As long as there's not that bloodlust, that desire to hurt a black person, for example, for killing a 75-year-old man. We all know that happened in California. As long as there's not that, then it's fine. Yeah, some people, they talk a lot. They like to talk in person a ton. Some people like to go on social media to tweet a ton. Some people like to do a bunch of other things a ton. I guess everyone has their different expression, but just don't let it go into a bloodlust to want to harm someone else. As long as we keep that, then I think it's all right.
Yeah, I really like what Randy said and what Barnabas said as well, right? I think there has to be a balance, right? And then your response should be appropriate to the situation you face, right? You don't want to kill an elephant with a tiny knife, right? So I think vice versa. And I think different people respond in different ways, and I truly believe our convictions drive the degree of our actions, right? So if someone who is not as familiar with the topic, or someone who is not, as involved, or maybe their response is smaller, but I think being able to take some step is good, right? But I think we also have to be a little bit empathetic and kind to others, right? When I've also heard things where where all this was happening, and some people say, well, how come you don't speak up, right? How come you don't do this, right? And how come you don't post this on your Facebook? Why don't you change your picture a certain color, right? I've heard all of that, right? And I think we all have different things that we're going through, right? And I don't think it's right for us to put our expectations on other people. But to Randy's point, like, we have to be truthful and weigh that balance and understand that, hey, today I have this conviction and I know I'm standing up for what's right, not because I just want to go and get into an argument with someone else for my own entertainment, right? I think as long as you're truthful to that, and then you're also empathetic to others, right, not judge their response, right? I think finding the right balance and then having the discernment of knowing how I'm going to respond, I think that's the most appropriate thing to do.
All right, yeah. Thank you for your responses. I learned a lot of things. I gained a lot of new insight. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Barnabas. Thank you, Randy, for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Thank you, our viewers, for watching. This is our first time. I would love to hear some feedback on how we can improve this platform. So again, thank you guys. Let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this night that we can discuss openly, Lord. We're your beloved sheep. Lord, you're our shepherd. Please watch over us. Keep us safe. Lord, help us fulfill your mandate, your will to care for our neighbors, Lord, to love our neighbors like ourselves, to seek justice and to do good. We ask that you give us wisdom, compassion, and love to stand up for ourselves and to spread your word. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you guys. It's 10 o'clock. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.